Hello and welcome to Vegan Business Talk. I'm your host, Katrina Fox. Now, my guest today is Tyler Mayoras. He's the CEO of Cool Beans. Now, after nearly 2 decades investing in agriculture and food brands, Tyler had seen the dark side of the American food industry firsthand. After learning about the negative impact of animal agriculture on the environment, he began a journey towards plant-based eating. Tyler co-founded Cool Beans in 2018 with a few other like-minded investors. Now, during the next 18 months, the group developed the products, set up manufacturing and trademarked the name before launching the product in the second quarter of 2020. The company started with 3 globally inspired wraps that put fiber-rich, bean-based superfoods front and center, and they're currently available in more than 800 stores. Welcome to the show, Tyler.
Thank you, Katrina. Very exciting to be here. Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to speaking with you because you're quite unique in terms of your background, because you've had a couple of decades in investing and impact investing, and now you've kind of moved to CEO, which is quite interesting because, being an impact investor, you could probably just, invest in other companies, maybe, chill out a little bit, but to actually start a business, that's, quite full on. So, well, first of all, though, I just would love you to address what are some of these...
Interesting or crazy? I'm not sure which.
One of the two. Yeah, they're probably both sides of the same coin. Tell us about some of these dark undersides of the American food industry that you've seen firsthand.
Yeah, it's so I was investing for a long period of time, and obviously I've traveled through every kind of slaughterhouse you can imagine. So there's certainly that side of it, which is very ugly, and but surprising, having been through a lot of those, and they're pretty horrendous and make you not want to eat those products. But it didn't really affect me going completely vegan until I think I learned about the climate impacts, which was probably around 2016. And it's quite staggering to think that 16 to 19% of all greenhouse gases are caused by animal agriculture. And what you don't realize, when you drive by all the cornfields and the soybean fields in the middle of the country in the United States, I always thought that was fed to humans. And I thought they were growing food. That's where our food came from. The reality is 65% of that cropland and farmland is used to feed animals. So, and it's monoculture. And that's really one of the big issues is it's just, they plant corn and soybean every year, usually corn. That's the predominant amount. And so when you plant the same thing over and over, you're killing the soil because you're not putting, it needs a lot of different plants to put nutrients back into the soil. And as a result, we've got dead soil that then also had chemicals thrown over it. They use a lot of chemicals in that space. And so every year they have to put NPK on, which is nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. And 2 of those ingredients, fertilizers, they mine, which is a very carbon intensive process. And the other is liquid nitrogen. And that one, they basically heat up air to a very high temperature using fossil fuels. And that creates a chemical reaction that creates liquid nitrogen. So it's all these inputs that go to grow the animals that really cause this huge carbon footprint. And when I heard that, I couldn't do it anymore. And that's really what led me down the road to go vegan. But throughout that whole process, I was learning about monoculture and learning about the chemicals and all these different things. Just said, this system is broken. We've got to fix it. And one of the easiest ways to fix it is to go plant-based and get away from a lot of things that cause these problems.
Nice. I like that. Thank you for sharing that. And I always find it interesting what people's journey towards vegan is, whether for me, it was the animals. For yourself, it was interesting, even though going in the slaughterhouse, it didn't even turn you vegan. I think that's just interesting as a side note. I think for anyone doing animal activism is that you've got to kind of get people where they are. So I think it was interesting that it was the environment for you. So thank you very much for sharing that. Now, some of your investments, you've got some massive achievements. You've helped Boca Burger, which is Kraft Heinz veggie burger, go from $7 million to $50 million in revenue over just 3.5 years. You've helped Simple Mills explode their business into over 20,000 stores. Can you tell us a bit, how did you do that? Because that's quite quite a major achievements. Can you tell us a little bit about how you did that?
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, I was with Boca Burger, I was a private equity investor, so actively involved in the company. But with Simple Mills, I was an angel investor, so less actively involved. But I've known Caitlin for a long time, and we exchange notes and whatnot. But she's an amazing CEO, and I think she's 32 now or something like that. Still one of the best CEOs that's ever been in my portfolio. She's very, very smart. But yeah, it's the CPG world in particular is very interesting and different than most other investment areas. It's very regimented and defined about how you go about things, and there's a controlled growth strategy, or there's a throw a lot of dollars into the mix and grow fast. And that tended to be the way we grew Boca Burger, which was we had some big partners with us. Austin Ventures was a big partner, and they had a lot of capital, and we were sitting at the right time, at the right place at the right time. So at that point in time was kind of the second wave of veganism that was going on, or plant-based eating, all around things like Garden Burger and whatnot, because people were learning about the fat content, and that fat was really bad for you. And so a lot of people were trying to basically shift their diet 1 or 2 days a week. And so Garden Burger was doing things like the Super Bowl ad, and all boats were rising together. And we were doing some advertising at Boca Burger, and we were lucky enough at the time to be the burger that tasted the most like a real burger. So flexitarians would try it. Nothing like Beyond Meat and Impossible Burger and what they have done now. But at the time, it was certainly the one that tasted the most like meat. And so that really helped us.
Right. So in order to get to grow that kind of turnover, and you obviously said you were investing and you were also, advising, what's the biggest spend? Like, is it marketing and advertising that you need to kind of get those revenues up there? I'm just kind of curious, because obviously, I think a lot of people listening would love to go from, 7 mil to 50 mil, but what do you actually need to invest in to make that happen?
So it depends on whether you make your product or not. In the case of Boca Burger, we did make the product. So it was being made down in Boca Raton, Florida, when we bought it. We moved it to the Midwest in a plant in the Midwest, because that would be central to where we were shipping product all around the country. But if you're not, most of the companies today, the CPG companies that get started, don't make their own product. They use co-packers that make the product for them, like we do. And so we have a company that makes our product. They happen to be in Ohio. And so most of our spend then is really focused on marketing. And there's something called slotting, which is, you usually, for most retailers, you have to give them some free product at the beginning so that they would try the product. And then personnel, the burn, until you get to a certain size range, you're going to lose money. And so you have to fund that burn, if you will, of personnel and whatnot. And so that's where most of the spend is, but marketing definitely is a big chunk of that.
Yeah, cool. Now, thank you for sharing that. So as we mentioned, you've kind of segued from impact investor to CEO. Tell us why. Why did you start your own company?
That's a very good question. And I ask that often, right? It's very different. I've always had the desire to be on the operator side, but it had to be the right opportunity. And what I saw when I went vegan, and I went for the climate, as we talked about, but I was also learning about the health benefits. And so when I went that way, I really wanted to eat predominantly what I would call whole food plant-based, which is a term, and I'm not sure if they use that term in Australia, but it's certainly in the US, it's very big. And what frustrated me was I would walk, and I cooked a lot as a result, and that was fine. I had not cooked ever before, so this was a new experience for me, and it was fun. But I didn't always have time to cook. And so I'd go to the grocery store and I'd walk through the frozen aisle and look at the prepared foods, and I was just dumbfounded that I couldn't find any whole food plant-based. Everything was high in saturated fat, usually replacing animal fat with oil. And while those products taste great, and I like Beyond Meat, I like some of those other ones, you really can't eat those every day. You're not going to be in a healthy state if you eat those every day. It's just not, it's too much saturated fat. And so that's what led, I saw this white space and it was very frustrating to me. So that's what led to founding the company. And I founded it with a few other folks, and we hired somebody to be the outsource management to basically help us kind of guide it. And I was a board member and an investor. And as we kind of went down the road and got into launch, and we could see that the people were buying the product and really liked it and it was resonating, then it became obvious that we really needed the founder story involved. We needed somebody who lived this every day to be involved with the company. And so I was the right person. It was a big leap and it was a little bit of a scary leap, but it was, it's been very rewarding to do it. And I'm glad that I did.
Wonderful. And I love that. I just want to highlight that because I think that's actually really important, that you do need someone to be the face of the business. And typically that's often the founder, because nowadays people want to know who the business is. And I'm sure you know that we are experiencing business in the past, you know, companies could get away with sort of hiding behind the brand or the company. But now people are much more interested and conscious, like, well, who are you and why did you start the company, what it's about? So kudos to you for stepping forward and taking that role, because it is quite different, you know, being behind the scenes and doing all that to doing what you're doing now, being on the on the show and everything. It's great. Thank you. So can you tell us a bit about some of the challenges in starting and growing a sustainable food company? And I wonder if you can talk obviously from your experience as an investor, but and also with your own experience as Cool Beans. What are some of the challenges and how can they be overcome?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are some challenges that are always there, and then there are some challenges that have come up because of COVID, and COVID has been a unique operating situation. We launched just before COVID last year, and that was a little bit trying. We had one customer that we were going into when we launched actually decided to close their business and move. It was Peapod, which was a home delivery business, and they decided just to retrench to the East Coast. So that kind of took us out of our number one customer right out of the box. And then a lot of the retail chains, the grocery chains, because it was so difficult for them to get product and keep the shelves stocked when people were hoarding food, they decided we're going to put all resets and new products on hold right now. We just have to keep the shelves stocked. So there was a period of time where it was very difficult to get on shelf, certainly about a 6-month period. So we first started going on shelf in independent stores in May, and then our first big customer came on in September of 2020, which was Sprouts, which has about 360 stores, and that's been a great partnership for us. We've since now grown, and we're now in about 1,200 stores. We're in Safeway NorCal, which is Northern California. We're in all of Wegmans, and a lot of other independent chains around the country. So we've started to gain some really good traction in 2021, but I would say that was the biggest challenge that we faced. And then, you know, the toughest thing that a brand has to do from the very beginning is build brand awareness. Who are you? How do we get the product in people's mouths so they can try it and realize, oh, wow, this tastes great and it's good for you, you know, and that's really the biggest challenge that brands face. And so that's what we've been working on, you know, since the beginning.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned you had like a 6 months without getting onto shelves, so that can be quite challenging, I can imagine, for a lot of brands who maybe don't have the capital to do that. I know some brands I've spoken to have switched to online and did an online model and were able to pivot to cover that. But yeah, it's interesting times. Certainly, as you say, COVID has thrown up a lot of challenges. Now, why did you go with frozen wraps? It's an interesting one because I know with frozen, that's kind of got its own challenges in terms of storage. It's not like you've got a long life shelf product that, you know, lasts for months on the shelf. And, you know, as long as it doesn't get boiling hot, it's not really a problem. Whereas with frozen, you know, there's that extra risk. So curious why you decided to go with the frozen aisle. Yeah,
so frozen has had a real resurgence over the last 5 years, and the reason is the quality is so much better than it used to be. The process now, IQF, which is basically cryogenic freezing, it's quick freezing, and when you do that, the ice molecules are much, much smaller the faster that you freeze. And as a result, they don't break the cell membranes. They freeze inside of the cells. And that creates product that when you thaw it or cook it, it keeps the same consistency and flavor that it had before. So it's a much better product. And I challenge, I had kind of gone frozen with a lot of fruits and veggies before Cool Beans because I think they taste better. If blueberries are a great example, if you thaw those overnight, frozen blueberries, they have so much more flavor than fresh. And the reason is because fresh really isn't exactly fresh. It's been traveling for 3 weeks from Mexico or California to wherever you are. And that means it's been sprayed with some chemicals to make it last longer, but it's 3 weeks old. And with frozen, you don't get that. It's cryogenically frozen at the point of harvest, basically. And then it's good for 18 months to 2 years, depending on what the product is. So we really like that piece of it. And we wanted to be very clean ingredients, no preservatives. And we felt that frozen was the best place to participate there, where you have a long shelf life, but yet have a very high quality product, clean ingredient product.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That's interesting. I didn't know that. When you said cryogenic, I was laughing because you immediately think of cryogenics, people preserving themselves for immortality.
Right.
So, and that's interesting technology. And I appreciate that because when you said you didn't cook or anything, and I just still don't. Like, I've been vegan for 25 years and I'm a really good lunch and dinner guest because I love being fed. So I like ready meals. So I'm a big fan of, the freezer, but I also do, I like things to be quite fresh as well. You know what I mean? Like you say, if you put them in the freezer and 6 months later, you don't want them to be old. So that's really interesting, that technology. So that actually makes a lot of sense. So awesome. And I think that's a challenge, like you say, to get that, or anything with a long shelf life or a long, life in the freezer, what have you, and to be fresh and healthy and clean. I think that's quite the challenge, isn't it? Because you can throw all sorts of preservatives and nasties in to keep it. So that's interesting. Cryogenic freezing. Wonderful. Wonders of technology. Now let's talk a little bit about retail, because you touched on this. Now retail, I know, can be very, very challenging for brands, where, particularly food brands, but often others. The margins are small. You can be dumped off shelf very quickly at a whim of the retailer. And for products that are vegan or they're ethical, they're sustainable, they often, if it's not a big, huge company, often they can be more expensive to make, so the cost is higher. So there's a lot of challenges, and it can be quite hard for independent brands to compete against the big guys, the big corporations that are bringing out their own products. Can you provide some tips for independent brands on how to navigate retail?
Yeah. So it's interesting. One of the things you said, I just wanted to kind of clarify a little bit. It's a long process to get into stores, first of all. So it's 9 months to a year. They all have these kind of reset schedules, and you're marketing to them, and then they pick you up, and then they're going to reset in the future. So it's about a year-long process to market.
Wow.
And
even for someone like you who have had that experience with all these other big brands. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, in frozen, a great example, Whole Foods is doing their annual frozen review of products in October. They won't actually set the shelves until July. And of course, we've been talking to Whole Foods people for a while, and so it's a long process. So that's one thing. But then, to clarify the other point, you had mentioned that they would drop you on a whim. That's not really the case. I mean, usually when you go into a retailer, you probably have about a year to perform.
Oh, okay.
And however, you have to perform. So you have to turn, and that means your product has to move on shelf. And so you have some correction time, but they're not just going to throw you out right away. But if you're not turning after a year, they're going to find somebody else, because shelf space is precious. So that's a big challenge, and you've got to find ways to turn, which means some is promotion on shelf, like doing specials so that people will try your product. Some is demoing, which can be live or digital. We've chosen to do digital demoing, which means And I can explain that in more detail if you're interested, but it's a different kind of process that gets people to try product. And then you've got to build brand awareness through things like podcasts or getting PR and written up in magazines or advertising. If you have density in certain areas, you can do some kind of advertising as well. So that's really the key to get people to try the product and get the product moving.
And I guess you've got to have that capital available, because also even when you're selling, there's sometimes a delay in getting the payment, and you've got to have be ready and have the capacity to ship all that product, but also, like you say, have those funds available for all the marketing and promotion. You did mention, I'd love you to just share a little bit about the digital demoing, because I think that's quite relevant now in days. And because I'm curious how that works. So I can see, obviously, if you're watching someone preparing or eating it, but like, I thought the whole point of demoing is people want to taste it, and you can't taste it through a screen. So tell us how digital demoing works and why it's good.
Yeah, so there's demoing is a double-edged sword. People love it because it gets product out there and people trying it, but it's also very, very wasteful. If you stand in a grocery store and try out product, probably, and let's say you try out with 100 people during the day, only 5 of those are people that are likely to ever buy your product. It's very, very small. And a lot of times you got little kids running around taking 5 bites, and you can't say no. You're just like, okay, yeah.
Or someone like me taking 5. Oh, that vegan cheese, I'll just try that one.
Exactly. So it's very wasteful. But what digital demoing does is, in particular, the company we're using is called Social Nature, and they have this cohort of people across the country that have opted in to try products based on their diet. So maybe they're keto or they're paleo or they're vegan, and they'll see products that fit that diet, and then they'll check ones that they want to try. And so they won't get to try all those, because then they've got to match up with the brand wants to send them into Sprouts in our case, or somebody else might want to send them into Whole Foods, and they've got to be within a 5-mile radius of that store to get a coupon. And then they'll receive a coupon in the mail or digitally that they can then take into the store and get a free product. Beforehand, they have to fill out some insights about how they shop and where they shop, et cetera. And then on the back end, they have to fill out some insights on how easy was it to find the product? Did they like it? Would they buy it again, et cetera? And then they review the product as well. So it's been very successful. We send a group of those we're primarily focused on Sprouts and Wegmans, and in the future we'll do Safeway as well. It's got to be kind of a big chain. You can't send them to small chains because you need enough density. And you get people, the great news is about 90% of the people that try it have not tried it before. And for us, in our case, about 80% are saying that they would buy it again. So we're really happy with that ratio, because again, we're trying to convert people into power buyers, people that buy the product regularly.
Yeah. So where do you get the people? Is that coming from advertising you're doing yourself, like on the Cool Beans website, or you're running social? How are you getting to the people?
Yeah, there's 2 ways that happens. With Social Nature, they have a cohort that they've built over time. They're constantly building. They're doing advertising to bring people in and opt into this program. And
Social Nature is a company that does this.
Yes, socialnature.com.
Okay, yeah. Got you.
Then there's other companies, Field Agent and Sample, that once you tell them where you want to send them, then they go out and sign those people up, in essence, through Facebook ads and whatnot, that are looking to try products that are vegan in your area. And so then they'll go and get them. And so ultimately, I think we'll probably do multiple programs in this. We've started with Social Nature during the last year, but it's a very good, I kind of hope that regular in-store demoing doesn't come back, because this is much more effective use of dollars.
Right. No, that's interesting. That's really helpful, I think, for people to know about that. And is that the same with buyers? Because I hear of some brands, like particularly when they're starting out, they go physically to stores, to buyers, or to the stores, and say, look, here's my product, try it. So are people still doing that, or could this model, do you think, work even with getting product into the hands of buyers?
Yeah, it's a good question. You can do that with small independent chains. So
Right.
independent stores where the manager in the store or the buyer in the store is making the decision. But when you're talking about somebody like a Sprouts or a Whole Foods, those decisions are made by corporate offices. They're nowhere near a store. And so you have to get to those buyers, usually through brokers that have the relationships, or you might have a salesperson that has those relationships, but then you get onto the schedule, if you will, to present to those buyers when they're doing their review on an annual basis.
Great. Cool. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Digital demoing. There we go. Wonderful.
Yeah.
So in terms of Cool Beans, we touched on a little bit about funding and the need for capital. So you mentioned that Cool Beans is obviously at the moment funded by yourself and a group of other impact investors.
Right.
Right. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. So we did an initial raise, and that was mostly angel investors and impact investors. And then we're now in the process of doing a raise that'll be a little more institutionally focused, but still a relatively small raise for the industry, because we're still relatively small. You know, we've only been out for about 18 months now, and we're in 1,200 stores. So we're still not a big company with large revenue.
Got it. That's pretty impressive, though. 1,200 stores within 18 months. That's great. So in terms of, obviously you're a seasoned investor, nearly 2 decades, excuse me. Can you talk about what do you look for, you and other impactors look for? Excuse me.
Take your time.
Excuse me.
I would offer you water, but I obviously can't get it through the screen. Yeah, I can talk a little bit about what investors look for in investments. I think that the number one thing with food companies is the product's got to taste great. So that is always a number one priority, is how does the product taste? And then you're really looking for things that are unique and different, filling what we call a white space in the industry. So a place where the company can compete, at least for a while, on its own. And then obviously, if you're successful, there will be imitators and other people that move into the space. But you want to have a white space at least for a period of time, because that's a strategic advantage for you. And then it's the team. You know, the team's really critically important. Have they done it before? And even if they haven't done it before, do they have the right mindset and kind of, do they look like somebody that could resonate with consumers? Because again, that founder story is important. So you have to have kind of that likability, if you will, with consumers, that really says, yeah, I believe in this person and I want to try what they're selling because it solves my need if it tastes right and I like their mission, etc. So that's kind of the I would say the three big factors that investors look for. And then obviously you look at all the other due diligence, which is the financial model and what are the margins and those kinds of things. But those first three really have to hit to make people say, yes, that makes sense.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. Sorry, I'm having a bit of a coughing fit.
I've been there.
Something in my throat. It's very strange. So how can independent brands, we talked a little bit about this, such as Cool Beans, like how will you continue to stand apart from some of the bigger competitors that are coming into the space? Yeah.
So we took this focus on whole foods, plant-based, or basically plant-based foods that are made from whole food ingredients. And right now we're fairly unique in that there's a few other companies that are doing similar things in different areas of the industry. But for the most part, I think people have historically looked at this as a small niche and it's not really maybe of interest or whatnot. Most people have tried to replicate meat or dairy products. And I think as what we'll see, and we've already seen it growing, is that over time, those meat and dairy alternatives will bring people into the plant-based space, whether they're fully vegan or just flexitarian. But when they get here, they'll want to move closer and closer to whole food ingredients that are really, truly good for you. and good for the planet. And that's really what we're all about. And so we hope that over time, more and more people will say, yes, that's what I want to do. And again, they won't eat our product every day of the week, but it's really healthy substitutes for some part of the week.
Yeah, I love that you said that. It's kind of like we can use the big company, not to be threatened by them, but like you say, actually kind of use them in a way to help, bring people to enjoy a greater variety of food. So I love that take. Now, I noticed, Tyler, you're currently selling your products, obviously, in the retailers that you mentioned, and you're also selling them in online stores such as Vegan Essentials and Instacart. I'm curious why you haven't at the moment got your own online store to ship to direct to customer. Is that something you're planning to do, or have you made a strategic decision not to do that? So just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's with a lot of thought that we've kind of come to this conclusion. So we did sell initially when we weren't in very many stores online, just so that we could have an access point for people to try us. However, we've stopped doing that for really two reasons. And our mission isn't just about being really healthy food. We want to be good for the planet too. So we've recently become climate neutral certified, which is a certification you calculate your carbon footprint, and you offset that with groups that plant trees and do things like that. So that's very much our mission, is being very good for the planet as well. And we had real issues with shipping frozen. It's expensive, but we could live with the expense. I mean, it's just lower profits per sale, but that's fine. I could live with that. The problem that I had was I didn't want our company to be eco-terrorists. I didn't want to be shipping product that has a lot of packaging waste in it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there are companies out there that are shipping frozen product, and there's a couple really big ones, and all of the packaging inside is supposedly recyclable. The problem is the big supposedly, because unfortunately, a lot of what is recyclable isn't actually recycled. There's only like two types of plastic, number 1 and number 3, that are actually recycled. And then if you start putting together cardboard and paper and combining them for internal filler and stuff like that, that doesn't get recycled because they don't know how to deal with it. And so at some point, somebody will figure it out and they'll make product that is truly recyclable as packaging filler. But until that point in time, we just couldn't feel good about that decision. Now, we may come out with other products that aren't frozen that we would do through DTC, but right now we haven't yet figured out how to do it without creating a big eco footprint.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, the whole packaging. I get it because I order, product like vegan cheeses, for example. So of course it's got to have, even though it's not frozen, it's still got to have, stay cold. And I often think, when it arrives, it's like, and I know the companies are doing the best they can with what they've got, but it's definitely a space that needs, a lot of attention for sure.
Yeah, and so we're happy to partner with people like Vegan Essentials, GTFO Vegan, and some of those people, because at least we know that there's 20 or 30 products somebody might be buying and putting together, and so the amount of packaging waste is spread over a lot of different products in a bigger order, if you will, than them just buying cool beans and creating.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, appreciate you sharing that. So just tell us now, just to wrap up, Tyler, what are your future predictions? Because obviously you saw this white space, as we say, the healthy, the whole food, plant-based, frozen. What are your predictions of what we're going to see in the future of vegan and plant-based business?
Well, I'm really excited about veganism in general. It's growing at just such a crazy rate, and people often say, "Oh, well, that's just not sustainable, right?" But the reality is, if you look at the population, so the number of vegans in the U.S. anyway has grown from 1% to 3%, which is about 9.8 million people. These are people identifying as vegan. If you looked at people that are millennials, kind of in that age group, it's closer to 6%. And if you look at Gen Z, it's closer to 10%. So the trend is in the right direction. And I honestly feel like we're going to see a point in time where, 30% of the population is mostly plant-based. And I'm really excited about that. I think that'll be a great future.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've been saying that for a long time. Like I said at the beginning of my book, Vegan Ventures, it's like I'm keen on getting vegan world domination, one business at a time, but very quickly.
That's
so
great.
I love that. That's good. Well, you heard it here from Tyler.
Yeah.
And what are your plans for Cool Beans? So, you've been going, on the shelves anyway for the past 18 months. What's your plans or vision for the future? Anything that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so we started with 3 SKUs. We've just added two more flavors: sesame ginger and Tuscan basil. That'll be coming out this year.
Oh, that sounds lovely.
So we're very excited about those. And but longer term, and our goal always was to build a family of whole food plant-based products. So we'd love what Amy's did for vegetarian. We would love to do for whole food plant-based. And so I could see us with other products in the frozen aisle, and we may actually come out with some products that are shelf stable using some technology. As long as we can keep the ingredient label very clean and whole food plant-based, we would look at some other ideas outside of the frozen aisle as well. But that's primarily, and typically our products are always going to revolve around high fiber foods like the bean. We love what they do for both the environment, because they sequester carbon into the soil, and what they do for humans and their health.
And of course, the taste is the important thing, because I know with whole food plant-based, it's got a sort of similar reputation that veganism had in the 1970s and the 80s. Do you know what I mean? With that bland kind of thing. And when people can see, like the burgers dripping with vegan cheese, but do you know what I mean? Or, creamy pasta, then that you've got to think. And then you look at, things like the beans and lentils. You've got to make sure that great that it's clean and it's whole food plant-based, but it's really got to taste good, hasn't it, as well, which I know you'll certainly do. I'm looking forward to eventually tasting on it. I was looking yesterday, I was like, oh, that sounds tasty.
Yeah, I wish we could get them to Australia. I don't think we can unfortunately get them. It's really difficult to ship frozen, obviously.
Of course, yeah.
If you ever vacation in Hawaii, we have lots of stores and Safeway stores in Hawaii. But it definitely has to taste great. And we went very flavor forward. So we use a lot of different spices, and been possibly even overboard. I mean, if you think about spicy chipotle, a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, that has a real bite to it. But and the sesame ginger has just a great flavor. And so we're very flavor forward. But yes, the 70s did have that reputation of grain burgers and things like that tasted different. The world's very different now. Most of those products are gone from the shelf. Most things out there have flavor, and then it's just a matter of, are they good for you or not? And you kind of got to look at the labels and figure that out.
Yeah, for sure. But I think it's a really good space that you're going into, because I think we've sort of gone through a phase the past few years, and still going through it, and we still will, where it's demystifying what vegan food is. So it's people can say, oh, okay, I can have my pizza, I can have my steak, as vegan say, I can have my burger, my cheeseburger. I haven't got to give up anything. But then there's also the other side, which is obviously COVID and other things have kind of put a spotlight on our health as well. And now it's kind of like, well, okay, you can do this, be healthy, and it still tastes great. And I think that's the space where you're in at the moment. And I think, as you said, we'll hopefully be seeing that one grow as well. So people have got choices. So you can have a naughty treat, like the cheeseburger now and then. And then you can also have, a whole range of whole food plant-based that you don't have to make yourself. I mean, I love the convenience aspect, as I mentioned earlier, and I think that's a big market. So I think it's really exciting what you're doing, Tyler.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it was born out of necessity, because I couldn't find anything, and now we've got it out there, and we hope that a lot of other people see the need as well. It's great. Wonderful.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your insights. It's been really great to get your insights from both an investor to a CEO, and particularly the digital demoing. So if you're watching this episode, do check out eatcoolbeans.com, and you can see that link scrolling along the bottom of your screen. If you're listening to the audio version of the show, that link will be on the show notes page. Tyler, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks very much, Katrina. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and bye for now.